Peptides are incredibly readily available, incredibly effective. I hate seeing somebody that I know has zero knowledge of anything regarding the Krebs cycle or cellular metabolism saying, this is amazing and it does this, take this. It drives me nuts. Even though these things are relatively safe, they're drugs. There's so much thought that needs to go into it. I think anybody that wants to utilize peptides should spend 10 hours researching any peptide that they want to try, not just with short form content and reels.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Set With Strength podcast. Today's guest is Drew Donaldson. Drew Donaldson is a coach, educator, and podcast host. He's actually the host of one of my all-time favorite podcasts, the DDT Method podcast. He is someone that I have an immense amount of respect for when it comes to just his experience coaching tons of different athletes, tons of different people across all different ages, helping them maximize muscle growth, shred body fat, get in ridiculous shape, and really helping take their bodies to the next level. What I love about Drew is that he's someone that absolutely loves kind of finding how things work when it comes to pushing the edge in human performance, whether that's maximizing muscle growth, improving conditioning, maximizing fat loss, and all of that stuff. So this is going to be a pretty dense podcast episode, but there are so many great takeaways and tidbits of information that Drew provides that you as a grappling athlete can start implementing into your training and into your recovery and nutrition protocols this week. So make sure you listen to the entire podcast. It's a great conversation. I actually was a guest on his podcast, so I'll be sure to add that in the podcast show notes for this episode so you guys can listen to both of those. And before we dive into the interview, just know, you guys probably already know, that this episode is brought to you by thestrengthmatrix.com. The Strength Matrix is your one-stop shop for everything that you need to feel and perform your best both in the gym and on the mat. So if you want to train to get brutally strong as a grappler, pack on slabs of muscle, and enhance your conditioning to the point where you never gas out again, the Strength Matrix has training programs to help you get there. If you want to build muscle but minimize fat gain, we have nutrition guides to help you not just fuel the training that you do in the gym and on the mat, but also help you maximize your recovery. If you want to get started today, you can go to thestrengthmatrix.com. You can also check out our free 30-day Grappler Accelerator training program. This training program has everything that you need to kickstart your grappling athleticism over the next 30 days. Full strength and conditioning plan, simple and clean diet guide, super sleep toolkit, recovery protocols, and everything else that you would need to kickstart your grappling athleticism over the next 30 days. You can go to thestrengthmatrix.com to check it out. And without further ado, let's dive into the episode with Drew Donaldson. You mentioned peptides, and I did want to ask you what you think are some of the big mistakes that you see people making now that we've seen this big rise in kind of like the catch-all term of research chemicals.
All of them. People are making all the mistakes. And the reason is peptides are, fortunately / unfortunately, incredibly readily available, incredibly effective, which is subjective to what you consider incredibly effective, but they're very effective. And they're incredibly cheap when you're buying them in bulk. Thus, everybody that has some capital can get a ton of peptides, mark the prices up to industry standards, and if they're popular enough online, can make a shitload of money. That's not the whole fear-mongering, be careful where you get your peptides because you don't really know. When something's as readily available as peptides are now, the chances of getting good stuff as opposed to bad stuff are actually more in your favor because you can get so many of them. You can get them from China and overseas and whatnot. Newsflash, that's not a negative thing. Like if you have a choice between domestically manufactured from a company that has all these checks and marks and whatnot that they can show you and mystery lab in China, obviously go with the domestic lab. 9 out of 10 of the people that are saying we're produced domestically are not produced domestically. They're all coming from China for the most part. And the ones that are coming from China aren't bad either. Like, for God's sake, guys, 10 years ago in the fitness industry, we were still melting down trenbolone pellets and separating the glue and trying to inject that. Like, and all of a sudden now your peptide warehouse doesn't meet the exact standard of cleanliness because they have the wrong front doormat, so it's going to kill you. Like, fuck off. Jesus Christ. Be careful where you get your stuff, but don't be so paranoid that everybody's going to sell you like fentanyl in a Mott-C container, because it's not going to happen. But if that ever happens to somebody, I'm going to feel terrible now, but I don't think it'll happen. But nonetheless, like, everybody can make money off of peptides. Like, you could open a peptide company in 15 minutes. The problem is, in doing so, people have recruited teams of athletes and bodybuilders and social media influencers, and it's all come down to 1,000 people now saying coupon code for peptide, coupon code for peptide, coupon code for peptide, coupon code for peptide. And I can't demonize it, because if it were regulated, they'd be harder to get. We wouldn't have as much access to them. But I fucking hate seeing somebody that I know has zero knowledge of anything regarding, the Krebs cycle or cellular metabolism or anything beyond the surface level, anything under the hood, saying, this is amazing and it does this, take this. It drives me nuts. And I'm trying not to be hypocritical, because I work with a couple of companies that do that. And I just kind of like avoid the group emails and stuff where they're like, hey, sales goals, because I don't think there should be a fucking sales goal on a medication. If anybody affiliated with any of the companies I work with hears this, I'm sorry. I don't agree with it, but I still recommend a lot of peptides to people that I feel should be, can benefit from peptides. But I hate that approach to it, because even though these things are relatively safe, they're drugs. Stop telling 21-year-old bikini athletes and amateur bodybuilding coaches to sell drugs. Like, cut it out. But if we cut that off, we wouldn't have access to them. So we have all this stuff about this is great, this does kind of this, with no understanding of what's going on. And then furthermore, we have people positioning themselves as experts that are just regurgitating information that they've heard, or they're misrepresenting studies to come off as experts. I am very strong in my opinion that I don't shit talk anybody, and I'll just unfollow or stop paying attention to somebody if I feel like they are offering information that I feel is toxic to the space, or I just don't want to consume it, because the internet's a very real place. It very directly affects my bank account, my family's livelihood. It very much so plays a role in those things. But also, it's a fake pretend place that doesn't exist if I don't want it to. So if I don't like what somebody's saying, there are buttons I can press so what they say never makes its way to me ever again, unless people send it to me, in which case I ask them to stop sending it to me. And if they don't, I'll just never follow them or pay attention to them again. There's a go away button for a reason. And I get arguing drives engagement, but that's also fucking cringy. So I'd rather grow slower and not see your stupid face if I don't like it. So I'm just going to block and move away. That goes for negative comments. That goes for whatever. Oh, Drew won't die on the hill and fight for what he believes in. Nah, I mean, I will in real life, but on the internet, no, I got shit to do. Block, whatever, delete, move on. I don't give a shit. But there are certain people that are out there just saying stuff with no understanding of it. People that present themselves as medical doctors that are not medical doctors. People that say this is the way that this is when it's not. There are things that are absolute in peptides and in small molecules. There are things that we know happen. There are way more things that we're just working on theory. Nobody actually knows 100% how SLU-PP332 works. How effectively is it shuttling body fat or prioritizing body fat over carbohydrate? Is it doing it so well that it's inhibiting the ability to use glucose at all, even in situations that demand it? If it's inhibiting it stronger than we think, then that can be driving so much ROS that can become incredibly problematic incredibly quickly. And why are there dosing parameters that go from 100 micrograms to 500 milligrams? That's insane. My speculation is ERR receptor density. That's a speculation. I can't say that that's why, but people will speculate and they'll say this is factual. This is what it is. This is what it does. And a lot of that information isn't actually there. So we have to go on what we do know versus what is theorized. What do we think happens based on our understanding of chemistry in general? What happens based on what we know happens and what cascades off as a result of that? There's so much thought that needs to go into it But people don't want to think. They just want to regurgitate. So you have the regurgitators just spitting out misinformation, and we have misinformation that's coming from people that are presenting absolute facts when they don't exist. So the only appropriate way to educate on these things, and I might have been guilty on misspeaking about things before, but I try very hard to not speak in absolutes, and I'll say this does these things that we know. That means it's doing this. This can show in this situation. MOTS-C, some people feel a ton of energy, some people feel nothing. Some people lose body fat a little bit quicker. Some people don't change their body composition whatsoever. Some people swear by it for gaining muscle. Some people think there's an AMPK driven response that just it's so strong that I can't build any muscle on this whatsoever. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody, so we just have to operate on the things that we know. It'll enhance insulin sensitivity and the pathway in which the cells have to work. It's kind of like an environmental player in making substrate utilization and metabolic flexibility a little bit more optimized, if you will. It'll improve those pathways. So if put into a certain situation, we can utilize that. But we also know that it's going to require some more fuel for the electron transport chain in the means of like methyl B vitamins and stuff like that. So situationally, we need to know what we know and apply what we can based on that. And then with a lot of it, we do have to go on not theory, but anecdotal reports of most people report this, most people report that. I have seen this in blood work. I have seen that on blood work. So people are just coming out and they're either making statements that they have no idea what the origin of those statements are because they're just saying what they saw in a reel and repeating it in their own information or in their own articulation, or somebody's reading a study or just going through a bunch of reels and saying, oh, this, and this means this. If you're doing this, it means this, and it's fucking wrong, so you got to do it that way. Fuck you, man. That's not how it works whatsoever. So there needs to be an approach from that. To all my clients, anybody that books a consult call, anybody in my Skool group, if there's a like, what's the best thing for this? Well, this could do this because this is what we know about how this works and whatnot. Because you can make anything this massive stretch to justify it. Every time I hear somebody that's an influencer that owns a peptide company or is affiliated heavily with a peptide company, ask the question, what's the best peptide for muscle growth? I literally cringe in anticipatory fashion because I know the answer is going to make me want to pull what little hair I have out left. So if they say something like follistatin, particularly the FLGR 242, that stuff, the myostatin blocking world is fascinating. And that might show itself to be the answer to the question, what's the best muscle building peptide? Follistatin itself, the old follistatin, no, like that's been around long enough to be proven to be kind of like a flash in the pan. Like it should work, but it doesn't work. And what else is it doing? The FLGR, the recombinant follistatin, I've seen some cool stuff with it. I understand it. I understand it enough to educate on it kind of broadly, but I don't want to make definitive statements on it because I'm still trying to understand it even more. That might very well prove itself to be the muscle building peptide, but as it stands right now, you ask any influencer or peptide affiliated educator, for the most part, what's the best muscle building peptide? What do they always say? They'll name a GHRP or a GHRH. Oh, tesamorelin. Oh, ipamorelin. Oh, ipamorelin CJC. Oh, GHRP. Like whatever it might be, they'll always go growth hormone. And here's the thing, they're not wrong. Because if you optimize, again, I hate that word, if you optimize your growth hormone levels, your body will be in a state where it will be better at recovering and everything will function better to rebuild and repair muscular tissue. That is true. Will you gain muscle putting tesamorelin at 2 milligrams clinically studied into your body every single day for 12 weeks? No, the fuck you won't. And it won't even do it in a way that's more noticeable than had you not done it at all. A lot of cool stuff will happen. You'll get a lot of cool responses. You'll probably be able to train harder because you'll recover better, especially at that cumulative effect of that dose. Like, yeah, you'll be recovering like a motherfucker. You can train harder and recover from it. And your ability to, like, growth hormone in itself will raise hormone-sensitive lipase. And then your ability to use body fat as energy is going to go up to the roof. And it'll do all these cool things. But will it actually make you, like, no. Fuck no. Like, absolutely not. But I can tell you it will and not lie to you. But like that's the same thing as like vegetables will directly grow lean muscle tissue because well usually when you eat broccoli you have chicken with it. Like nah, man. So yeah, the biggest thing with peptides, it's misinformation or stating facts where it's theory. Those are the two biggest problems. I think anybody that wants to utilize peptides should spend 10 hours, that's 10 cumulative hours, researching any peptide that they want to try, not just with short form content and reels. Find the studies that exist. If you got to feed them to Chat GPT to give you the bullet points in a digestible way, that's totally fine. Then take all of the anecdotal data that you can find, read through that, see how that adds up. If something inhibits an enzyme or does something to an enzyme, look that enzyme up, realize, understand what that does, understand how that cascades into different situations, understand what side effects could happen. There's generally not going to be a lot, but understand how to maximize that peptide. It's a signal. It's not trend. You can't take any peptide for the most part and just go results and they just happen despite yourself. Like usually they have to be paired in the right setting with the right action. So for no other reason, research this stuff so you know the best setting in which to put it. Even things like outside the peptide world, things like like L-carnitine, like injectable L-carnitine that's so multifaceted. Are we utilizing it to enhance fatty acid transport into the cell to be used for energy? Yes, absolutely, we can do that. That's a massive benefit of L-carnitine. Well, what if I'm doing endurance training and my glucose is really, really high? I don't really necessarily want to take that in to shuttle fatty acids in. Well, no, because carnitine can also buffer, can basically manage excessive acetyl CoA that builds up from rapid depletion of glucose or rapid utilization of glucose. You end up pulling in so much glucose if you're doing like intensive cycling or really highly intense just conditioning type training, and you'll burn through glucose so quickly. It's like the glucose is kind of like the orders going into the kitchen. The kitchen is the cell, is your cell, and then they're putting the food on the counter for the wait staff to go get, but there's not enough wait staff, so the plates are piling up and nobody's getting their food. That's a buildup of acetyl CoA, and carnitine can actually go in and help clear out that acetyl CoA. It's not just fatty acid transport. But if you didn't read about carnitine and what it can do, you might just know that it helps fat transport into the cell. So if you're trying to if you're trying to drive your conditioning through the roof for a competition or for a race or high rocks, CrossFit, BJJ, whatever it might be, and you write off L-carnitine, well, maybe you shouldn't be because it also does this. There's understanding and there's being familiar with something. You should not take a drug that you're just familiar with. You should take drugs that you understand.
I love it. Your podcast is one of my favorite podcasts to tune into. And you've brought in so many people that, and I know you've said this on your podcast, you're bringing in the people that like the smartest influencers you see on Instagram. These are the people that they're going to learn a lot of stuff from. And one of those people that you've had on the show a few times and is a mutual friend of ours is Jake Benson. And so I wanted to first start by asking, like, what's the biggest thing you've learned or like the biggest, knowledge bomb that Jake Benson has hit you with over the last year?
Oh, it's so hard to kind of encompass it all into like one thing. It was just if I had to say like a specific topic that he's really opened my eyes to, it's just the brain in general, which is an incredibly wide topic. But in teaching me about that, it's transcended into my programming, into the subtle nuances of my training, my supplementation. I had worked with Jake in a mentorship role for maybe about a year. And it was something that I'm profoundly grateful for because he wasn't really offering it at the time because he's one of the few people like I look at my own schedule sometimes and I have a panic attack. There are people that are busier than I am, and it baffles me how they exist. And Jake is one of those guys, but he was gracious enough to take me on as a mentee because I had never done a super deep dive into even your basic neurotransmitter stuff. And I knew what I knew, which was like baseline, like decent for a coach, I suppose. Like I didn't specialize in that area, so I didn't claim to be a specialist in that area, and I still don't. But I wanted to deep dive a little bit more so I can understand how nootropics work, how the performance aspect is going to relate to the state of mind that you're in and the state of your, are you more of an excitatory, like leaning person? Are you somebody that's borderlining? That's not a word. Are you somebody that's borderline high anxiety? Are you somebody that's perpetually calm? What do we do if we're, let's say, using too much THC and we want to balance that, or glutamate buildup from stimulant use is high? There's this whole world that I had baseline knowledge of, but I didn't feel comfortable enough to speak on it. So I've always been of the mindset that I'm going to work with a coach or I'm going to work with a mentor. I'm going to pay for continued ed because we have all this free information out there and it's fucking dope. It's awesome. But I want to be able to deep dive into stuff. I want to be able to ask questions. So at first, that was working with as many different coaches as I could, not at the same time, obviously, but hire somebody. Hey, I want to learn your methodology. Let's do this for 6 months. Let's do this for a year. Moving on a little bit. Early in my career, I got to be mentored personally by Ben Pakulski, which was the biggest thing that shaped my career and set me on the path that inevitably led me here. And then after kind of parting ways, he ended up going to focus on some other business stuff, leaving MI40 Gym. I ended up leaving. I was running the gym at the time. I left to start my own brand. And then I was like, all right, well, I'm going to start hiring people now. So I started looking into mentors to hire because coaching and just doing stuff on my own that was awesome, but I wanted to spread that out a little bit. I wanted to take in more case studies. I wanted to learn more about stuff like female pharmacology and, like perimenopause and stuff like that. Then I wanted to learn about this, that, and the other thing. And then eventually led me to like, I need to understand the brain. That's what led me to Jake. And then that led into deep diving into different modalities of training and everything like that. So my long-winded answer is Jake taught me a lot of cool stuff, but he also helped change how I think about stuff, which then enabled me to go learn more stuff from other sources and everything like that. And, he's the most humble guy on the planet and doesn't promote himself nearly as much as he should, in my opinion. But situationally, he'll just say, oh, cool. No, no, you did the what? No, dude. Like he had such a profound impact on my career. It's unimaginable. So it was a new thought process and it was approaching things through a whole new lens.
I agree that Jake is definitely too humble for his own good sometimes. Like he's so freaking smart, and I feel like more people would benefit so much from just being able to learn from him. And so, like the things that you or I could do to bring him on our podcast, help share his message with the world, I think is always a good thing. And one thing that I've loved about what you do is that you are like a coach through and through. Like I think sometimes people get into coaching and they get into the fitness space and then they start coaching, they're passionate about it, and then they start making a little bit of money and they're like, oh, how can I scale this and not coach anymore? And for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, from my perspective, it seems like you're still fully driven to coach people, still fully driven to help people, still fully driven to help teach people how to live better lives and perform better. And so a big question that I have for you is, through your experience coaching, when working with someone who, let's say, is kind of jacked, so they're not like completely out of shape, but they're also still kind of fat. They're not like as lean as they want to be. They're not as fully jacked as they want to be. They're kind of in that frustrating intermediate area. What are some of the levers that you initially pull to help them enhance their performance, improve their physique, improve their health, and kind of go from there?
So the beauty of that avatar, of that just generalistic person, we'll call him or her that, is that that's honestly the biggest representation of the biggest consumer base or crowd or viewership or followers or whatever the appropriate thing to label the collective masses that consume what we do. That is speaking to most of them. So that's been my main focus for the better part of the last 3 years, really. And as much as I will thank you for that, and I am a coach through and through, and I am driven by helping people, that's also as inaccurate as it is accurate. So you were spot on. Nothing you said was wrong, but the conundrum there is I'm actively trying to get away from coaching people one on one, but not to scale it because I want to be able to reach more people. So I still do take clients one on one. It's scarce that I take on new clients. Every now and then I'll put out that I'm personally going to be working with a few more people, just schedule a call, whatever it might be. But I try to keep that to a certain number of people. And I have all the respect in the world for the guys and girls that take on like 100+ clients. I like to deep dive a little bit more. So I know that my limits, with the fact that I own several businesses, both coaching and education related and outside of this, that I like to work with no more than 50 people at a time. So that in and of itself is a full-time job, and I have to stay on top of everything in order to be able to fulfill the responsibilities of my other businesses and whatnot. So I want to educate as many people as humanly possible. So that's why I've been focusing on more things like expanding the podcast into my Skool group, into more content online. I'm looking into launching several other platforms of social media. I hate social media. I kind of hate the internet, except for the fact that it gives us cool shit if we're looking for cool shit. But I'm just looking to delegate that stuff out a little bit more just so I can create more stuff and just teach more people more things. Because if anything else, I want to be like a conduit of information, because I had such a hard time learning things as I was coming up in the industry. And it wasn't because there wasn't information out there. It was almost because there's too much information. And sometimes it's hard to figure out who to listen to. And so many people from the coaching world and the education space will be dogmatic in one specific area to the point where this is the way to do it and this is the only way to do it. The problem is, if you have 10 incredibly intelligent people that are saying this is 100% the way to do this, and none of those 10 people that you could readily admit are incredibly intelligent, well spoken, everything's backed up, everything makes sense, but yet how does it all contradict what the other person is saying? It's because, in all fairness, there's probably 1,000 correct ways to do everything that we're trying to do in the fitness industry. There's just a million wrong ways, but there's still 1,000 right ways. So you can't be an absolutist in any of this. Even when it comes down to studies, even when it comes down to science, I know the trend in the hypertrophy world right now is incredibly low fatigue, incredibly high stability, moderate to high frequency, incredibly low volume. Like you better be napping between your sets, et cetera, et cetera. And the people that live and die on that hill will cite all of these studies that have concluded, like, yeah, this is likely the best way to go about this. But likely the best way to go about this doesn't mean the only way to go about this. If the main highway is the best way to get from city A to city B, but my car doesn't drive on the highway for whatever reason, or there's inclement weather, or there's a traffic jam, or I don't have a car, I'm riding a bicycle, there's going to be different situations for different people. And all those other methodologies, methods, approaches that you've seen people swear by, those might be the better for that individual. Now, scaling back to the question, that individual that's kind of intermediate, they're in good shape. They go to the beach and everybody's like, wow, that person is in good shape. She's really hot. She's really jacked. He's super jacked. He's super hot, whatever the fuck it is. Situationally, it's somebody that has shown that they can follow a plan, be it super consistently or moderately consistently. Like they've shown that they could show adherence in some way, shape, or form to something with some resemblance of hard work. Because to be fair, if you have those two things, those two concepts, and you're executing them, you'll get results. That's the other reason why I can't really shit on anything on the internet unless it's dangerous, because everything, when applied with consistency, especially if there's progression there, and then with intensity and intent, will get you where you're going. Because otherwise, you'd walk into any gym in the country and you'd see everybody totally out of shape. A lot of people are in pretty good shape, but that doesn't mean a lot of people have an incredibly well thought out approach to these things. Some people just go in on a generic split and they just work really hard, whatever really hard is to them, whatever it is that day, whatever they're rested for. And they know that they have a protein shake after the gym. And sometimes they buy the protein pancakes. And then every now and then they have steak and potato for dinner instead of pasta and meatballs. And they look good. They're kind of jacked. They're pretty healthy. Their blood work is pretty okay. That's the person I'm trying to communicate to, because that's the person that's going to have the hardest time getting to the next level. So those are the clients that I like to work with. I still work with athletes. I still work with bodybuilders, but that's the crowd I'm really trying to communicate to the most. And since there's so many of them, I'm trying to transcend beyond coaching and get to the point where I can just offer all of this information, never in a this is the way Drew does things, because I want the way Drew does things to be the way that works. And the way that works, as I just said, is kind of everything. So it comes down to, if I had one method to work with this avatar of a person, to take somebody from good to great, to take somebody from, wow, man, you're kind of jacked, to holy fuck, what the fuck is that guy on? Or what's this guy taking? Or how's that guy so strong? Or just how's this business owner that's not even a fitness guy? How does he look like a fitness model? And they're not really living that lifestyle. They're living a lifestyle, but they're not living the traditional misinformed, like, I get up at 5 a.m. and run for 3 hours, then I have boiled chicken and white rice 6 times in a row, and then whatever the hell it might be. How are they making this work? So if I had a method or I had an approach to this, it's the ability to pivot within different systems that are part of a bigger system. So when somebody says, like, carnivore diet's the best thing to do on the planet, okay, it might be for somebody for some amount of time. Why? What does it do? Why would you approach that? A vegan diet's the best way to diet on the planet. Okay, for who? For why? What's the goal? Maybe for a little while. Well, it's a Mediterranean diet. Well, it's this. And that reflects in programming as well, too. This is the best way for hypertrophy. Maybe for many people, so we can look into that first, but let's look at the variables. Let's look at different things. You speak to some high level bodybuilders that can train really, really hard and really intensely. Throwing that type of intensity into high frequency at low rep ranges, even though it might be best for hypertrophy, if your joints are destroyed in 3 weeks of programming like that, is that really the best way for you? It's like an old Tom Purvis from RTS, biomechanics certification, used to say, like, what's the best workout or what's the best exercise for legs? At the beginning of I've done several Tom Purvis clinics. What's the best workout for legs? And everybody that's never been to one before, usually it's like squats. Every now and then you get like a leg extension, you get squats, you get like, and it's like, all right, so traditionally barbell back squats, can we all agree that that's probably the best? Okay, yes. And then he goes, well, what about the guy that has no feet? It's like, oh shit. And yeah, that's an incredibly like specific situation. It's an incredible example of hyperbole, but you got to look at that from a more broad range. So it's like, oh, carnivore diet, Mediterranean diet, this type of approach, high carb, high fat, low carb, low fat, whatever it might be. Yeah, that might be great for this person, but what are the internal constituents of that person? And then what are the external settings? What's the day-to-day life like? What does the training have to be like? What's the goal? So we have to be able to pivot within all of these methods. And the actual method, if there was, my business name is DDT Method. If there was a DDT method, a Drew Donaldson training method, it would be the method that's the amalgamation of every single method that works, because there's no actual method. There's physiology. There's, I do stuff and stuff happens. How do I put together enough stuff that adds up to the stuff that I want to happen big picture, so I can get my big picture just via stuff happening? It's all signals and it's all commands. Your training, your diet, it's the right one for the right person. So we have somebody that's lean, that's not shredded, and they're big, but they're not jacked. And they come in, they want to say, like, I want everything. I want the best of everything. Because that's a lot of who I work with right now. Because when you're getting like a company CEO or a successful entrepreneur or a marketing expert or somebody that's from outside of our world, that's just an active, fit person, and that's the person I want to speak to the most, or somebody that's like a fighter, somebody that's training really hard for performance, but they're like, I want to be a little bit more jacked, or I'm having some problems in my blood work. These people still need to and want to be multifaceted. So they're not coming to you like a bodybuilder that's like, I just can't get above 300 pounds. That's my only goal right now. Or I have a contest prep. I just need to get shredded as hell and keep as much muscle as humanly possible. These are more multifaceted goals. So it gets incredibly confusing because we can recomp, we can, contrary to what anybody will say about, like, they'll use thermodynamics as the fake BS argument because they don't understand that either. And it's like, there's no way to gain muscle and lose body fat at the same time. I mean, there absolutely is, but there's no way you can maximize both of those things. You can't lose fat as fast as humanly possible while putting on muscle as fast as humanly possible at the same time. But where does that person land on that spectrum? Is that person pretty lean, but they can be a little bit leaner, but they need to gain some size? We could probably gain some substantial muscle by using the synergy of the right training approach with the right diet, with the right supplementation, and then drop just enough body fat and then alter things just because, muscle is more metabolically demanding. Muscle will use more substrate just to exist than body fat will. So if we make some intelligent changes in their programming, their supplements, in their training, in their cardio, then we could absolutely get that person significantly bigger while getting them a little bit leaner and making them look incredibly lean just based on storage of substrate. Whereas if the person needs to get a little bit leaner first, I might focus on just preserving as much muscle tissue as humanly possible while just trying to eat up as much body fat as possible. And in a lot of cases, if a person has a hard time retaining muscle, the best way to do that is with a metabolic style of training while driving workload up incredibly high, chewing through substrate as much as possible, then actually bringing carbohydrate up incredibly high because that needs to fuel that training. Otherwise, you're just spitting out a bunch of ROS. And we can get into the nuances of different training styles in a little bit later if you'd like to. But just driving that food up and then matching that with a higher work demand. It doesn't mean staying in the gym for 3 hours instead of 2 hours. It means cramming 3 hours worth of work into 2 hours and then graduating to 3.5 hours of work in 2 hours or whatever it might be within the constraints of the person's recoverability, which you can also alter and adapt over time. But driving food up and driving training volume up, they start to get a little bit leaner. Maybe you want the scale to go down. You hold the work volume high and drop the food slightly, or you keep the food the same, increase the work volume, and you just work with what works best for the person. You have empty stomach cardio that'll burn more fat while you're doing it, but less fat after the fact. You have high intensity interval training, which is going to burn almost pure glucose and glycogen, which turns into glucose while you're doing it. It won't burn any fat, but it'll burn more fat after. But then you have drugs that can go in and change exactly how these things work to favor them in different ways. And we have a ton of drugs at our disposal now. So there's just endless possibility. And I hate to answer stuff with a generic, it depends, because that's another cop out answer in coaching and educating. It's easy for me to sit here and just say it depends all day and give you no real answers and then just be like, hey, trust me, I'm smart. Give me money. Join my school group. But situationally, it depends. You just need to attack each person with the whatever it depends makes the most sense for them, but there's room for all of it.
I love that you bring all that up, and thank you so much for breaking all that down for us. And I think the biggest thing that my hope is that my audience takes away from that is that context is so key. I think a big mistake that a lot of grapplers make is that they're like, hey, I want to be jacked. Who's jacked? Chris Bumstead's jacked. I'll just do what he does. It's like, well, two completely different contexts. First of all, you're not Chris. And second of all, you don't do what Chris does. So maybe there's like a better option or something else that can work. It's a little bit better for what you're looking for. One thing that you mentioned was metabolic training and ROS. For my audience who may not be too aware of what those two things are, can you break those down and kind of how those relate to each other?
Absolutely. So I think everybody that wants to be able to apply advanced training techniques or advanced levels of supplementation or even advanced dieting techniques, you need to go all the way back to biology at a cellular level. And for a lot of coaches, that'll actually sound cringy because you'll have guys that just primarily coach in bodybuilding. And I love bodybuilding. I think bodybuilding is super cool. I also think it's the worst thing that could ever happen to the fitness industry, while one of the best at the same time. So I know I'm doing a lot of this talking in circles stuff, but bodybuilding is awesome because it brings to the forefront a lot of new advances in technology and supplementation, even in approaches to diet that wouldn't be crossed as bridges for years, if at all, otherwise, because we have thousands now, thousands upon thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of complete fucking lunatics that just want to guinea pig all sorts of random shit. And 99% of them don't really understand it, but somebody that did understand it said that this could do this. So they started doing that. And then they either saw that it worked and then it spread and then more of them did it, or it didn't work, or somebody died and nobody ever did it again. So it's this weird just evolution of stuff that's a little bit ahead of the curve, as long as it pertains to body composition, what you look like at the end of the day. So they're out there on the front line doing a lot of this crazy stuff and giving us all this anecdotal data so we can start to figure out how things work and what happens in application and whatnot too. But the problem is There's a huge difference between training purely for aesthetics and then the maximization of aesthetic development. So something that's so insanely overdeveloped that it's presented on stage in such a way, and coaching for performance and coaching for health and coaching for like fixing problems, so extreme health situations. And the biggest problem is that, like you mentioned before, everybody's trying to maximize income before they maximize what they can actually deliver. So what you have is bodybuilding, which is incredibly huge on social media. I read the percentage a couple weeks ago, just going over some just general marketing stuff that I purchased, and it takes this huge chunk of the fitness space because it matches up with that visual dopamine hit. Like, see really jacked guy that you want to look like, or really hot, really jacked girl that you want to date, or vice versa, or whatever it might be. And that dominates the actual space, drives it up in the algorithm. So a lot of the information, a lot of the stuff that works is based mostly on physique enhancement. And then you have coaches that are able to take advantage of this platform, and more power to them. And some of them are spectacular, that just explode in popularity because so many people want to try bodybuilding now because it's trendy, and everybody needs a coach because that's what you do when you're competing in bodybuilding. That even though people say it's oversaturated, there's plenty of space and people are making a ton of money. But the problem is being able to get somebody stage ready. In a lot of cases, it's really just a matter of just increasing workload and decreasing intake of food, and then masking all the problems with doing it from a generalistic approach with just drugs. If you throw a blanket of drugs over somebody and just make them work hard and consistently and follow a diet that's hypocaloric, the drugs will generally keep enough muscle if they didn't start incredibly undermuscled, and the starvation will generally just eat away at tissue until the fat goes low enough that the people that happen to look the right way genetically will go on stage and look like complete gods. The problem is that doesn't translate in any way, shape, or form to actual intelligent programming, training, dieting, or any approach that keeps just long-term health and performance and stuff like that in mind. It's a temporary look that you can nail with a relatively simplistic approach if you don't mind causing problems otherwise. And that's not me. I'm not trying to be overdramatic and saying that like bodybuilders or bodybuilding coaches are killing people. They are in some cases, and it is kind of a fucking problem. But I'm not saying they all are, and I'm not saying it's like immoral or reprehensible, but they're kind of like tricking themselves into thinking they're like health coaches or lifestyle coaches because they don't want to turn down the clients and say, I don't want to bodybuild, but I want to look like this guy. Oh, cool. Yeah, no, we'll do it this way. And then you have average people doing, chicken breast and rice and like a drizzle of olive oil or like a teaspoon of olive oil as like 6 meals. And these people don't know what macronutrient or micronutrients are. They know what macros are, but they don't know what micronutrients are. They know nothing of general health, gut health, performance, like when to pull back, when to push forward. It's just arbitrary timeline. If you survive, you'll look good on stage. If you have the genetics to, if not, then we'll just work even harder, and you'll either burn out or you'll eventually look lean enough to do something at a regional level. And if 3 people show up and you're better than one of them, you're second place. Keep doing it, whatever it might be. And it just muddies the waters. So people skip over the important nuance because it's boring and it doesn't apply. And I can get somebody shredded without it. But, there's a big difference between I can make $1 million if I work really hard and establish a business plan. I can also make $1 million if I go to a millionaire's house with a gun and I rob him. Both situations, if pulled off successfully, will end with me holding $1 million, which is awesome. But in one of them, I get to use that money to make more money and live a good life and invest and take care of my family. And with the other one, I'm going to get shot or put in prison. But hey, I still made $1 million. That's the bodybuilding effect when people don't educate themselves as real coaches and they do good at bodybuilding. So circling back to the question now, because it's so unnecessary, quote unquote, in just getting somebody lean, people skip over that. They just focus on calories in, calories out. And that is the biggest part of losing or gaining mass. There's a lot of other things that go into it, a lot of other things, but that's the biggest determining factor for most people. But what's going on under the hood is basically you have your cells. and you have your mitochondria. And everybody now that mentions mitochondria does the whole, we all learned it's the powerhouse of the cell, but that's how everybody knows it. So we all learned it's the powerhouse of the cell, it's the engine inside the cell that makes it do its stuff. And now more people are kind of more informed about it because mitochondrial peptides are such a big thing now. But that's also led to more quick fix misinformation. Oh yeah, mitochondria is good. If it's good for your mitochondria, it's good. Take mitochondria things. But again, we don't really understand. So that's a 3-hour podcast in and of itself. But essentially, ATP is cellular energy currency. It's real energy. ATP is what energy is. Energy is not caffeine from an energy drink. That's the perception of energy. Energy is not coffee. That's the perception of energy. Energy is ATP. When we eat food, we're taking in fuel and we're storing substrate, which will be used to make ATP. And that's not just the energy to like get jacked and go work out. That's the energy to recover and build muscle. That's the energy to run your internal organs, to run your whole system, to run your house cleaning, to fuel your brain. So essentially what has to happen is you have glucose and you have fatty acids. And those things get used to make ATP. So when you eat carbohydrates or when you convert amino acids into glucose via gluconeogenesis, you have glucose in your blood, and then you store glycogen either in your liver or intramuscularly. And that's kind of like your backup source of glucose for when your blood sugar gets too low. You also have fat stored on your body and triglycerides in your blood. So when you need energy, your body is going to primarily look at fat or glucose, depending on the situation, to utilize to make energy. So it goes through this whole sequence. There's a conversion to acetyl-CoA, goes into the Krebs cycle through the electron transport chain where it starts spitting out ATP, and the end product is ATP. That's turning food into energy. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It just gets transferred. We have energy coming in our food sources. We're storing that as substrate. We're taking that through conversions. We're turning that into ATP, and we're using the ATP to power whatever it is that we do. So we need ATP. And the harder you're training, you need more ATP, not just to fuel that hard training, but to fuel the recovery of the training. So with fat and with glucose, we have two different ways to get ATP. The main difference is that fat per unit gives you a ton of ATP. Glucose per unit gives you a little bit of ATP. The difference, though, is to get fat to become ATP, it's like this step by step by step by step process. It's kind of like me trying to make a point answering a podcast question. It takes forever, and then it'll give you a ton of ATP. If you have glucose, it goes bam. Essentially gets right there really quickly, fast ATP, but it only gives you a little bit. So do you need rapid fire? Do you need ATP now? Because if you do, we're just going to rapid fire glucose because that'll give it to you now. It's not going to give you as much, but we can keep motherfucking going and cranking it out and just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like sending all the troops in through a one doorway entry, but they're all just sprinting out. Fat is basically like you have a ton of troops ready to walk out slowly, but they're standing in a garage and the garage door is opening slowly and you have to wait till it gets all the way up and then they just start slowly walking out. So more energy from fat, faster energy from glucose. Now, if your body is struggling to create energy, if your cells are struggling, that's going to spit out ROS. So ROS are reactive oxygen species. Reactive oxygen species are the byproducts of spitting out ATP. Now, you're always going to create ROS. It's a natural process. It's basically, think of it like the engine's working hard and sparks fly off it. A few sparks are fine. They actually trigger like a cleaning system to take care of the sparks. You have antioxidants that come in, and those take care of the free radicals, because these sparks are essentially, for the most part, unpaired electrons. Electrons like to be paired. In the electron transport chain, as you're making energy, you're going through this process. The sparks are loose electrons that get loose, they get free, and they start going nuts. And these electrons want to find other electrons to pair to, so they're going to start binding to other things in the body. When those unpaired electrons are just binding where they shouldn't, that's like more and more sparks flying off the engine. They're now hitting the inside of the hood of the car. Now they're starting to like cake up on it and erode it. Now you've gone from ROS to oxidative stress. You're in a state of oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is going to slow down important cellular processes. It's going to bog down the software in the computer. And over time, that turns into driving inflammation. So inflammation, we know, is a natural good thing that we should have, but chronic background inflammation will be driven up through oxidative stress. And then your body is now trying to delegate all of its resources to taking care of the inflammation. Inflammation is like a fire. You hurt your knee, a giant fire erupts in your kneecap. The fire department knows where to go. They go down there. That inflammation is good. They're addressing the problem. If inflammation is chronic and systemic from things like oxidative stress or bacterial infections, things like that will actually drive up little fires in the background, or not even actual fires. Basically, everything in the whole town gets really, really hot, and then people pull fire alarms because they think there's a fire. Now, every fire department, every fire truck available is driving around the entire city trying to like spray shit with a hose that's not there, because they're there to put out fires. And the signal is telling them there's fire everywhere. Now, when there are fires popping up in different places, it's sluggish to address. Things take a long time to heal. You're driving too much damage rather, and then your resources are being run thin because now you're just trying to stay alive and put out fires rather than actually progress and grow. And this drives up everything from cellular aging to chronic inflammatory conditions that can contribute to digestive problems, atherosclerosis, inflammation driving up within the lining of the endothelial lining of blood vessels and whatnot. So, and I'm not saying like if you work too hard for 5 minutes, all this is going to happen. You're going to have a heart attack and cancer and all sorts of shit. But driving an energy process that's not there, you're creating ROS. That's indicative of causing future problems down the line. So we have to be not only aware of things like energy in, energy out in terms of what we're eating and how we're performing, we need to actually make sure that we're addressing things like recovery, and we're addressing things like the proper training system being fueled the proper way. Because if I'm driving this incredible need for glucose to make ATP, I'm doing really high volume training, drop sets, supersets. Like I'm trying to train conditioning. Let's say I'm a fighter. I'm on the mats 2, 3, 4 times per week, expending a lot of energy. I'm doing cardio in the morning because my cardio conditioning is not that great, and I need to get really good at it because I'm gassing out when I'm practicing. But also I want to get jacked. So now I'm going to go do the, I don't know, Chris Bumstead, as you mentioned, like his high volume split where it's supersets and giant sets, or like a Milo Sarkev, like insulin fueled giant set where it's 12 exercises strung together and whatnot. I love training like that. I'm not saying that's bad, but you go to do that on top of everything else, brother, you better be eating like 2,000 carbs a day. Otherwise, you're trying to chew through glucose that's not there. You're not going to be able to use fat as a fuel source. You're going to end up cranking cortisol every time that your storage tank drops too low. That's there to try to pull intramuscular glycogen out, which is good. We want to utilize and refill that because we want to store or we want to train our ability to store substrate. But you burn through your muscular glycogen and you burn through your liver glycogen and you're burning through blood glucose. If you ran out of glucose with a high demand for it, you would just die. So your body knows to actually go through gluconeogenesis and start breaking down amino acids, which is stored in muscle, in order to make glucose to fuel the continued training. So the irony is you're now breaking down muscle to fuel the training that you're doing to build muscle. But the deeper irony to that is it's literally just because you're training wrong. It's not even because you're training too much. You're training with too much volume too fast. You're creating too much demand. And that's where it comes down to how we break things down for the actual individual. So that's why it makes so much sense to not be dogmatic in one approach, because I might love high volume training, but I might be eating 800 carbs a day, and I might be doing like moderately paced cardio that's not taxing on glucose. And I might be taking some things that are glucose or glycogen sparing so I can utilize my glycogen primarily for my training. If I'm already doing a bunch of other stuff that's physically demanding and I can't meet those glucose needs, or the demand just drives up reasonable glucose needs for anybody, then my training can't be glycolytic like that. Then I have to train primarily for strength, or what's viewed traditionally as primarily for strength, and maybe lean into that Charles Poliquin functional hypertrophy range where we're at like 6 reps to relative failure, not quite, 2 to 4 reps, not really just neurologically driven strength training, but something that'll get us stronger, something that'll still stimulate hypertrophy, but something that, and this is the case for that vocal minority on Instagram that says you have to manage fatigue. For that guy, maybe you do have to manage fatigue. Maybe we're trying to drive our ability to store and utilize substrate up because you run really good on really high carbohydrates, but we want to store that. We want to train that ability to store even more. maybe we're continuing to do our, our mat work and whatnot. Maybe we're down regulating high intensity cardio, and maybe we're driving that metabolic training up really high. We're driving those giant sets. We're driving those supersets. And I'm giving this person 100 grams of sugar during their training or fast carbs, and then another 100 after to pay off the glucose debt that you might even be driving while drinking 100 if the training's intense enough. So we're training our body to be able to use more glucose. So now when you back off on glucose, or you back off on training rather, and you're getting into the final stage of your programming leading into your actual performance day or your fight day or whatever it might be, we're backing off on what's eating up the glycogen and storing or training our ability to store more, because now we've made those fuel tanks significantly bigger. So now I can carb up on like 1,200 grams of carbohydrates for 3 or 4 days leading into the fight. And now my fuel tank is maximized. And you couple that with some exogenous ketones and some extra fuel sources going into your actual like fight, into your competition, whatever it might be, your energy is now endless. And that's without even introducing things like diisopropylene dichloroacetate or anything to basically drive a chemical enhancement, so to speak, on the process. Now you're just doing it via your training and your diet. So it's so much different for so many people.
Hey, real quick, if you want to become a jacked and dangerous grappler this year and you want to consistently feel and perform your best both in the gym and on the mat, you need to take a much deeper look at your health. You may not even realize that there could be some serious health markers and things going on with your hormones that are holding you back from being able to get brutally strong, pack on slabs of muscle, and improve your grappling athleticism. That's why I partnered with Merrick Health, because I wanted to get on track to fully optimize my performance and my health. They run lab tests that check over 100 different biomarkers, and by working with one of their expert coaches, I was able to get a personalized roadmap that tackled everything from supplementation, nutrition, hormone optimization, really everything that I needed to start seeing results and improving my performance in just a couple of weeks. You can get the exact same blood panels that I get and the ones that I order for all of my athletes, plus get 10% off your initial assessment by going to the link in the description below and using code SETLAGE at checkout. That's merrickhealth.com, code SETLAGE to get 10% off your initial assessment. Now, back to the show. There's so much good stuff that you hit on that I feel like we could piece out each and every one of those things for an hour each. But one thing I did want to zoom in on, if we can, is for a lot of grappling athletes, they're either lifting heavy in the gym, 3, maybe 4 times a week, and then they're going pretty hard at jiu-jitsu 3 to 4 times a week. How would you suggest, based on what you just shared with the different energy systems and fuel sources, how would you suggest someone kind of prep themselves for those two different activities? What may be best right before their workout may look different than what they need right before they go train jiu-jitsu for 90 minutes. So what would your suggestions be on how to kind of differentiate how someone would prepare from either a nutrition standpoint, maybe even a warm-up standpoint for each of those two activities?
So when you're entering any sort of like physical endeavor that's anywhere beyond moderate intensity, you have to pay an incredibly high amount of attention to your preparation for that. And that's going to change for everybody. Obviously, anybody that's doing anything highly physical into their late 30s, early 40s, and beyond is going to want to spend some more time moving in a pattern that's similar to how they'll be moving with max intensity. That doesn't mean that if you're a younger guy in your early to mid 20s that you can skip out on that stuff. So I'm not saying that you need to pay less attention if you're younger. I'm saying you need to pay a bunch of attention, but you need to pay more attention when you're older. Now, when it comes to preparation for every one of these things, it's very, very indicative of, or what's best is indicative of the individual. So again, it's kind of an it depends answer, but in terms of how you're approaching it neurologically, that really depends on what type of person are you. Are you somebody that's like highly wired usually? Are you somebody that's prone to high anxiety? Is in the space inside your head, is it like pure chaos all the time? If somebody else stepped into your brain, would they experience it like a what the fuck is this? Like a rock concert with explosions and shit like that? Or would they step in and just go, oh, this guy is nothing. It's just cruising. It's like elevator music or whatever it might be. So that's going to play a role in like, if we're looking at like a traditional like pre-workout, do I want to be stimmed up? Can that take away from what I'm doing? Will that, vasoconstriction from heavy stimulants coupled with the fact that it'll just drive dopamine signaling too hard with the fact that I'm already kind of a wired person, is that going to give me too much and burn me out? Or am I already on like the high anxiety end of things? I need to calm down. I need to be able to just hyper focus on what I'm doing. Is the actual training something that's more skill based, or is it more just go, go, go type stuff? There's a big difference in even like equal or similar intensity to if I'm approaching something like a moderately glycolytic, but like heavy and intense workout where I know I'm going to be doing some heavy ass weights, but I'm probably also going to be doing some drop sets and whatnot. I need to be a little bit more mentally locked in than if I'm going to go do 8 minutes of intervals on the assault bike. Because with the assault bike, I just need to survive 20 seconds of just blowing my lungs out and then just try to catch my breath for 2 minutes in between. I don't really need to think. I don't need to be dialed in. So, hot take on this one, probably not the best thing to do, but if I'm going to recreationally consume something like THC anyways that day, which isn't an everyday thing, but it's something that I will do on occasion. If I'm going to do it and I still need to train that day, if my training is something like 40 to 60 minutes of like zone one or zone two or even zone three cardio or hit cardio, I might just do it before because I don't like doing that stuff and it's boring and it like hurts my lungs. But I'll just kind of power through it with this because that just takes away my focus in a good way. I know a lot of guys like to smoke weed before they train. I would never do that because I take such an intricate approach to my actual training that I need to know that everything's firing and everything's moving. And I'm not like overly analytical about it anymore, but I've just paid so much attention to it for so long. I'm just going through a mental checklist for fun whenever I do anything, which I think is how everybody should approach any sort of training with weights. I'm not a grappler, but if I'm going to go train in that sport, I want to be 100% cognizant. I don't want to be trapped in my own head or just distracted by something on a TV in the corner or whatnot. So it all depends on what the actual activity is and what the individual is that reacts to it. Because I'm sure there are some guys out there that, and this weed's a weird example, but it's one everybody can at least relate to because most people have tried it. I'm sure there are a lot of guys out there that'll smoke some weed and just go, to go roll around the mats or or even compete. I'm sure they exist. But again, that's the individual. So what does it do for you? So I think any approach to anything that's going to be cognitively enhancing needs to take that into consideration as well. As far as like physical warm-ups and movements go, I think it always needs to be something that's very similar to the actual style of training that you're going to be doing. So if I'm going to be going through a very intelligently programmed strength training or hypertrophy session, it's usually put together in such a way that the first movement that I'm going to do is something that, unless I'm pre-exhausting or anything fringe like that, is going to be something that's going to hit a lot of the area that I'm focusing on that day. So I might take some extra time to prepare for that one. Now that becomes different if it's a different style of training. If it's that highly glycolytic metabolic style training, I'm not super concerned about maximizing output or time under tension or intensity. So if my first movement is like an incline dumbbell press, I might do like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 warm-up sets of 10 reps, old school pyramid up in weight till you get to a relative working weight, and then start doing my 2, 3, 4 working sets, whatever it might be. Because I'm just trying to like move around substrate. I'm just trying to really get a pump. I'm doing a lot of stuff under the hood beyond that, but I'm trying to maximize that as much as humanly possible, especially if I want it to be more glycolytic. Now, if I'm trying to maximize the output for the actual training, those warm-ups are going to be significantly less. If I am basing all my training on max mechanical tension and failure with proper form under the heaviest load humanly possible and trying to minimize chewing through substrate, I'm trying to utilize all of my energy for my actual jiu-jitsu training or fight training or whatever it might be. I want my weight training to not be eating up most of my fuel. So that might be the case where I'm doing 2, 3 warm-up sets of maybe just 2 to 4 reps until I'm ready for that heavy working set. And that's my first set of 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever it might be. And then I'm trying to minimize the actual movement that I'm doing. But as far as generalistically for anything, I like a little bit of like parasympathetic beta oxidation. I want to start moving in such a way with some consistency that's going to tap into body fat a little bit and get that energy system rocking and rolling a little bit. And now all these energy systems, they're always all working at all times. It's always sliding scales and whatnot. There's this general misconception that like now I'm burning fat, now I'm burning glucose, it's a living, breathing thing. But if I'm getting in cold off the street, regardless of what I'm doing, I like about 6 to 8 minutes of just Steady state, don't let my heart rate go over 100 and just move consistently for that amount of time. And then I like to do equal time with a heart rate as high as possible. That's probably going to be a little bit less if I'm pushing like 8, 10, 12 minutes of just getting rolling. If I'm, it's a cold day, I just want to get my joints lubed up a little bit and just start moving. But if it's going to be something like 4 to 6 minutes, I'll match it, or I'll just do some very, very high intensity output work. 4 to 6 minutes of keeping as high a heart rate as possible, try and hold my heart rate under, not as high as possible, but I'll try and keep it over 150 or so, and just really get some norepinephrine flowing and get ready for the actual task at hand. And just get moving, wake up, get everything flowing, so to speak, in a different way, in more of a neurological way, and just wake myself up, even if I'm already ready to rock and roll. I would much rather do that than taking 400 milligrams of caffeine, because at that point in time, now my blood's flowing, my heart's beating, I'm good to go. But I don't want to push that too hard, because if I'm trying to maximize the intensity of the session, I don't want to begin to fatigue myself at all. That's when I want to be hyper attentive to things like that, just not all the time. Now, in terms of training for anything that's more sports specific, that's going to be sports specific. So profound statement, Drew, I know. But it's going to be one of those situations where just move like you're going to be moving, roll around on the mat a little bit, just get yourself rocking and rolling. Same thing, get your heart rate a little up, then get your heart rate very up, then let it calm down a little bit, and then just enter in as you would normally start to train. I'm assuming that in most modalities, you're not going full bore the minute that practice starts. You're still easing into that as that's going. But I think part of the warm up is also preparation in your training, because again, I hate to be the guy that craps on bodybuilding, because I really do like it. I think it's super fascinating, and I still, I do a lot of my training for how I look. A lot of it's catered to that too, because whatever, we can all be a little vain at times. But situationally, a lot of that training, you have to pay attention to the fact that it's really sagittal plane focused. It's all straight line stuff and whatnot, and you're getting some frontal plane movement a little bit too, but there's really nothing in the transverse plane, and there's really nothing, especially now as we're preaching the importance of stability for output using machines as opposed to free weights. That's great. Don't get me wrong. For hypertrophy, that probably is your best bet. But I don't want to use the term stabilizer muscles, because that's not really accurate. But you have a whole system of integrated movement that's based on all of these things working together from angles that aren't as predictable. And flaws and weaknesses in that chain in actual performance are going to show through dramatically. So you need to make sure that in your training, you're doing some rotational work, you're doing some less conventional work, even if your goal is just get as jacked as possible. If there's anybody that's watching this that just loves BJJ or loves competing or loves MMA, and they just do it because they love it, but they're never really going to pursue it at a high level, so they're like, yeah, I definitely want to do this. I want to be able to take care of myself, and I'm competitive, so I like to do it. But it's just a hobby. I also want to have a huge chest and shredded abs. I want to look like a bodybuilder. The worst thing you can do is just do your sport and just train like a bodybuilder, and that's even hindering your bodybuilding progress, because that bodybuilding training is leaving out a lot of the stuff that's going to make a difference when you're actually trying to perform and trying to fight and trying to take care of yourself and trying to win. But also that stuff is going to equally give back to your bodybuilding performance. So you need transverse plane work. You need rotational work. You need anti-rotation. A lot of people will start with anti-rotation, then get into rotation maybe, if at all. You need to train rotation and anti-rotation. You need to train in these different patterns. I'm a huge proponent of sandbag training, even for bodybuilders, not 12 weeks out from a show, but situations where you have to get into unfavorable positions and you have to load those positions and you have to move, you have to integrate. If you dive into like fascia training, I know that's really fringe, but there's a lot of stuff that might not be 100% proven in that world that kind of adds up when you look at anecdotal experience and actual case studies. And that's the opposite of isolation, really. So we need to be able to integrate these systems and get into positions that we're not used to getting into. I have a really cool situation where I still train some clients one-on-one occasionally. I'm helping to run the personal training department for this new emerging gym chain that's starting out in Florida that's going to be massive. And part of what we want to do is have the best personal trainers in the world, staffs upon staffs of them in personal training. It's a shit show. So it's a hard task to find the highlights as far as the trainers that are out there, and the diamonds in the rough, if you will. And bringing them in and trying to teach them all of these modalities to be able to teach everybody, to be able to kind of communicate this to everybody. You need to integrate everything. You need to integrate all these things. So in terms of preparation, I would definitely prepare for your sport or prepare for your endeavor in a way that's reflective of the endeavor, but also add some parasympathetic work followed by some high heart rate work. Doesn't have to be any more than 15 minutes. And then some basic movement patterns that integrate into what you're doing. And don't train specifically in one modality if it's going to hurt the other things that you're trying to do. And even if it's not, you should still try to be kind of jacked in the areas that you're not focusing in. So, as I mentioned, I'm in this very unique position because being at this gym and being there from the ground up and the hype around it in the area, I still get access to all these people that want to come train with me. And it's social media is a perception thing. Like I'm not a celebrity. I'm very lucky to be somebody that's achieved a certain level of respect, but it's not like I will never be recognized at a 7-Eleven or at a coffee shop or anything like that. Nor do I want to be. But locally, I have a good reputation. People will want to come train with me. And if I get a high level bodybuilder that comes in and wants to train, one of my favorite asshole things to do, if they're monitoring their resting heart rate, I like to take a look at it when they're on like a heavy set of leg press or leg extensions or like dumbbell press. And they're so proficient at that energy system that their heart rate will go up. Don't get me wrong. But it's like, goes up to like 150. Like it's nothing insane. I give them a 10-pound medicine ball and say, do 20 slams. Heart rate like 200, like passed out on the floor. It's like, whoa. And the thing with that, and this is where it actually relates to what I was saying before, is taking a slam ball, like a 15-pound slam ball, and just doing just slams, sagittal plane at that, not even mixing up the plane of motion, just doing repetitive slams for 20 reps that might be 40 seconds at the most. If that's gassing you out to the point where you can no longer stand on your own 2 feet, if you got to the point of being able to do twice the weight for twice that amount of time and breathe through your nose the entire time and not even be winded, don't you think when you go train bodybuilding stuff, you're going to be able to train way harder? Because the answer is unequivocally yes. So it might not build any sort of like, you're not going to build a secret muscle where it's not going to be the secret to your glute gains or whatever the fuck, but it might be the secret to training even harder, not even doing anything different, not adding volume, not adding weight, not adding sets, but just locking that in so much more that the intensity of your training is now up and now you're sending stronger signals for adaptation in the area that you want to adapt in. That's the importance of not leaving weak links and being adequately prepared. Preparation is not just what you do before, it's what you're doing the entire time. You might not need pre-workout carbs for whatever you're training. If you're training in a metabolic way and your carbohydrates are already really high, or if you trained metabolically to train your ability to store glycogen, then you drop that down, but you can utilize it so well if you're really good at it, if you have really insane metabolic flexibility, toggling between fat and glucose, you might not need anything pre. But if you're not taking it a lot, then you might. It's so different. It needs to make sense.
If we were to give like a sample warm up that someone could do, what are your thoughts on this? You mentioned doing something at a little bit of a lower heart rate, just some light physical activity just to get started. So they go into the gym, so they jump on the fan bike. That way it's something full body. And they do that for 5 to 6 minutes. Like maybe they're just kind of like listening to a podcast, something super chill. And then what are your thoughts on for the high heart rate stuff? They implement something that, our friend Jake Benson talks a lot about, like creatine-based work, where maybe they're doing some rotational med ball slams, putting some good effort into something where they're kind of spiking their heart rate that way. Is that kind of what you're referring to with like the low heart rate moving into the high heart rate stuff?
So what I like to do in that situation, now I love creatine work, but I approach creatine work to be a little bit more restorative than I do for it to be anything that's going to drive massive adaptation. So creatine work is something that I've spent so much time speaking to Jake about it and Andy Triana about it as well. And I'm just so fascinated by it because if you do it right, which is basically just in load selection, rest time, and what you're actually doing in terms of the movements and whatnot. The whole idea is you're stimulating these movement patterns and you're basically I look at it as holding your place in making progress. So if you're going to use deadlifts, for your creatine day. You can take a deadlift workout and kind of hold your spot in progressing through your deadlift pattern because you're not taking a week off from it. You're still doing it. You're still stimulating your posterior chain in such a way, but you're doing a submaximal load with, 30 to 60 seconds of rest time. You're letting that phosphocreatine system replete just a bit so you can just do 1 or 2 reps with it again, just to tap into it again. And you're never really spilling over to highly glycolytic work. So when you're not spilling into glycolytic work, that ROS production is incredibly low because the phosphocreatine system runs very efficiently. It just runs for about 10 seconds at the most, significantly less for most people, I think. So situationally, you would want to do something that's not going to drive this massive need for recovery in between sets because you don't want to tax your system out and crash your CNS. But you don't want to do anything that's going to spike your heart rate and then continue to cumulatively spike it. That's why the creatine workouts can't really go too long because then you'll become glycolytic just by nature of your heart rate spiking and then that internal demand for more glucose. So you'd just want to do those submaximal loads for explosive reps to kind of train that pattern, that explosiveness for nothing that's going to be too taxing with enough rest time to just do it again, but over and over and over and over again. So that could be utilized as a warm-up because it is preserving you from a fatigue standpoint. But I like to do that more as its own workout. I wouldn't necessarily want to utilize that or play that card in a session that's non-restorative. What I like to do is I actually want to get my blood flowing. I want to get everything spiked up a little bit. I want to do it as much as I can without driving fatigue that will take away from anything. So that's why if you're using, let's say, the assault bike, I think this is how I have most of my clients do it that are coming from a multitude of different backgrounds because I do have to simplify things if somebody's really busy. So I can't put anything that's incredibly specific. Do 3 of this, 3 of this, 3 of that, whatever. They have maybe 3, 4 workouts per week and they have a generalistic warm up for all of them and what will fit in any type of warm up outside of those creatine style workouts, which again, driven to be more restorative. It's usually assault bike or spin bike because not everybody trains at a gym that actually has an assault bike, which is crazy to me, but it's incredibly commonplace at the same time. You would do 6 minutes on the bike, just conversational pace, just move. If you're watching your heart rate, don't let it get over 100. And then for 6 minutes, I would try to maintain as high a heart rate as I can maintain for 6 minutes. I just tell them all, blow your lungs out, maintain it as much as you can. That intensity on minute 6 will be nowhere near minute 1, 2, or 3. But the whole thing is if you're monitoring your heart rate, I would like to see you get up to like 150, 160, and just try to hold it there as much as you can sustain. Little trick to that too is I like to sustain nasal breathing through the entire first 6 minutes, the parasympathetic environment. And then I want to sustain that as long as I can into the actual burst of intensive work. And for most people at first, that's going to be like a minute, maybe a minute and a half. But as soon as you get oxygen starved, just kick it into mouth breathing because that's a whole other system. That's a whole other podcast in and of itself also. But then what you're doing is you can progressively overload your ability to keep nasal breathing into your intensive work block for a few seconds. You'll never be able to drive max intensity for 6 minutes strictly nasal breathing because your max intensity, your capacity for which will rise. But it will train your carbon dioxide tolerance a bit more. And that's something that I think we should all be paying attention to in the background, because if you're highly tolerant to carbon dioxide, your body uses oxygen better, and then you can progress even faster in everything. That's gaining muscle, losing body fat, performance on the mats, performance in any sport. So nasal breathing and its reflection into carbon dioxide tolerance is insane, not to mention just general carryover into the nervous system and whatnot. So I like to incorporate that. And then if we really were to simplify it, 6 minutes easy, 6 minutes as hard as you can, nasal breathe as long as you can until you can't. Once you can't, don't try to tough it out, just mouth breathe. At that point in time, internally, your system is ready for mostly anything. And then we'll get into the specifics of what you're actually training. If you want to do some med ball slams before you're going to do your deadlifts, if it's a highly intensive deadlift day and you have the room for a little bit more volume, but you don't want to tax that out too much, that makes sense. Rotational work here makes perfect sense too. If it's a session that's no longer geared for anything rotational that's planned, you can do rotational med ball slams, scoop throws, stuff like that. Rope flow is more restorative in my opinion. It's awesome. I love it. But if you're going to incorporate rope flow in a warm up sense, I would go with like a 5 pound weighted rope, something that's actually going to create the need for you to transfer some force around a little bit too, just to get everything ready to rock and roll if you're going into something intense. But as long as it makes sense.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for breaking all that down for us. Drew, this has been so awesome. This has been an amazing conversation so far. As we're kind of winding down to the end, I had some rapid fire questions for you. They definitely don't need to have a rapid fire answer, but just some things that I've noticed, things that you've posted and things that you've dropped in your podcast. It seems like you're huge on constantly like trying new things, running new experiments and things like that. And one thing that I heard you talk about on a podcast was BFR training. So what's been your experience with BFR training? How has it helped your own training, and how are you integrating it with some of your clients?
Oh, I absolutely love it. And blood flow restriction training is one of those things that, like 15 years ago, it was all anybody could talk about, and it was the next big thing, and it was amazing, and it's going to revolutionize the industry, and people were getting great results with it. And then it just went away. And the reason for that, honestly, in my opinion, is there are some bougie ass BFR cuffs out there. And I say that as a person, I own two pairs that are over $300. But you can get close to the same effect with a $12 set off of Amazon. That's just like a slide buckle. I don't think there's a lot of money to be made in blood flow restriction. So a lot of people aren't really pushing it because there's no end result. And from a coaching aspect, it's not sexy because there's an extra step involved because I have to tell people if I want to do it, buy these BFR cups. It's something that just kind of it's overcomplicated to sell, at least in the opinions of others. And it's really hard to make a bunch of money off of it because it's kind of restrictive to one style of training. I think the other problem with it was, again, going back to the people that speak dogmatically and in absolutes, the people that were out there talking about blood flow restriction training is the best way to do it, whereas most people tend to do, were saying it was the only way to go about it, and you're stupid if you don't do it, like everybody does about hypertrophy work these days. Not the case, but an amazing tool. So essentially, blood flow restriction training is restricting the amount of blood that can leave the area, not the amount that can get in. So tourniquet training was the oldest established name when they were doing the initial studies in it. But essentially you tie off your arms or legs and it traps more blood in that area. You get an incredibly massive buildup of metabolites. You accumulate a ton of lactic acid or lactate, which is now seen to be an alternative fuel source, which is incredibly neurologically restoring. They're doing Alzheimer's research off of lactate as fuel. So there's a ton of benefits to being able to build up and tolerate lactate, but that is also driving incredible hypoxia in the muscle as well. Hypoxia, we know, is a driver of hypertrophy. Yes, mechanical tension, low fatigue has been proven to be likely the most effective way for everybody to gain skeletal muscle. Hypoxic training conditions also will drive hypertrophy. That didn't change. That didn't change based on somebody did a study that had nothing to do with BFR and they did a study to prove that something else works very, very well. There are multiple approaches to multiple different goals, so we can't write it off for that reason. Now, is it the best? I don't know. Maybe. For the individual, it all depends on the person. Are there parameters in which it makes even better sense than other situations? Absolutely. So I have really, really bad tendonitis in my wrists. I have really, really bad, not bad, but I have tricky elbows. They'll flare up on me. I've got bone chips. It's from pro wrestling. I don't want to get them removed. They're not that serious, but it just, some days I have a crunchy elbow, some days I don't. Sometimes I just want to train a little bit differently. Sometimes I want to train really heavy, but I don't necessarily want to train my arms really heavy. Throwing them on my arms and doing high volume for 15 minutes doesn't even really matter the actual exercise selection as long as I'm just contracting and lengthening the muscle. The pump is absolutely phenomenal. And you look gnarly for like 3 hours afterwards, especially if you're all carved up. You get vascular, super jacked. Oh my God, it's fucking cool as shit. But
It's the
also,
best. It's the absolute best feeling ever.
dude, fantastic. And then you're accumulating all these metabolites and you're creating all these enzymatic responses. And if you want to get deep in the weeds of stuff to experiment with, you're getting this massive proliferation of stem cells. So if you want to introduce some peptides like PEG-MGF, which is going to cause greater recruitment of a lot of the satellite cells in that area, and then some like IGF-LR3 a few hours later, which can aid in the step in which the satellite cells will recruit IGF and everything like that. You can basically lever in these things, or if you're doing like using exogenous growth hormone in the background, I'm getting excited now and just mumbling about drugs. There's all these different things that you can incorporate there, but it's an amazing way to train. Now, with my legs, my knees have been problematic for years because, again, I was a pro wrestler for about 11 years in total. Some of that was full time. I worked for WWE for a brief amount of time, for a couple of years. And I worked out in Las Vegas for about a year, just constant traveling back and forth from Florida to Vegas, and I was working independent shows and everything like that. Beat the living shit out of my knees. So I was at the point where I was like, I'm just going to have to limit my leg training entirely. I ran a couple healing peptide courses. The last couple that I ran, I really nailed it. It was just a mix of a lot of different stuff with red light therapy, with things like Likovsky coils and PEMF. And I've actually managed to get my knees to the point where I've pretty much completely healed them. So I can squat 405 for reps again. I can move heavy weight on leg press, leg extension, everything like that. I do not have a single issue. But one thing that I started doing more often earlier in the process, now it's maybe a week out of every block. So I'll do every 4 or 5 weeks, I'll do a week where I'm doing BFR training specifically, where I'll just do it to get the loads a little bit lighter, to really focus on blood flow, to drive hypoxic responses, and just to give my knees a break. And if my knees start to feel a little bit creakier, if they start to feel like, yeah, they're not bad, but like they're not feeling great. I'm in my 40s. There's going to be days when they're not feeling great. I'll just pull out my normal training. I'll put in BFR training. And if anything, they feel better even faster. And I don't miss a beat on my leg training. My leg development stays or will continue to improve depending on what I'm doing, because I might be in a deficit trying to get leaner. I might be trying to put on a couple pounds. I'm always toggling between goals and trying random crazy shit. But it's without fail. It will always give me this acute or a novel stimulus that for the first couple of days, I'm like, holy shit, this is insane. And then I can continue it for really as long as I want. And I'll have diminishing returns because that novel stimulus will then become a chronic stimulus, and I'll have to see the slower progress over time. But situationally, it'll never get to a point where I'm like, I need to stop this BFR training because my knees are starting to go the opposite direction. It's always incredibly restorative. So it's amazing for situations where you need an alternative to a more traditional approach. But I don't want to label it as that because then it's just injured old guy training. It's also a different approach, a different way to layer in hypertrophy, a different way to train and preserve muscle tissue if you're training for performance, a different way to preserve muscle tissue without driving tons of excess fatigue in a different way if you're dieting and trying to get shredded. It can definitely be incorporated. It's just got to make sense.
I love everything you just said about BFR, and then you brought up some really interesting stuff that I'd never heard before, especially with the relation with stem cells in BFR training. And I think specifically for grappling athletes, investing in a solid pair of BFR cuffs, whether it's like the really, really self-inflating Bluetooth nice ones that are $350, or even just like a $12 pair of bands you get from Amazon, I think that could be like one of the best tools that someone has in their toolkit for training. Jiu-jitsu athletes, I'd imagine it's probably crazy in pro wrestling as well. Like the elbows get banged up, the ankles get banged up just from all sorts of different things. And if there's anything that can just help kind of lower the barrier to entry to get a training stimulus, that to me always seems like worth looking at. And BFR cuff seems like one of those things that can kind of help like lower the barrier to entry to get not just a training stimulus, but a really unique, multifaceted training stimulus. So I love BFR cuffs. I'm with you. I think BFR is freaking awesome.
I do want to throw one mistake at you that people make with BFR, just because it's something that bugs the crap out of me.
Let's hear it.
BFR is not for your glutes. I don't know if this actually applies to anybody that's watching this podcast, but I'll see the posts online all the time, and it's all like the girls tying the leg bands on and just being like, oh, glute training. That's not cutting off the blood supply to your heart, glutes, bands. It's not doing it's great for your hamstrings and your quads, But for God's sake, so if this is a predominantly male viewed podcast, guys, I'm sure some of you have, girlfriends, wives, fiancés at home that are obsessed with glute training. Don't bother with the BFR if it's a glute movement, for God's sake. They make glutes look great because you're tying something and lifting them up and hiking them up. Like, even my glutes look great when I have BFR bands on. It's not doing anything to your glutes. They just look different because you're tying fucking ropes underneath them. Like, there's no BFR. You can't cut up. That'd be around your waist and it would kill you. No BFR for glutes.
Well, Drew, this has been just an amazing conversation. I'm sure we could go for like another 2 hours because I got so many questions for you on all sorts of topics and just your experience from your background and the way you've continued to educate yourself has not just been super inspiring for me, but it's been awesome to see you inspire other people to do the same thing. As we're kind of closing out here, where can people find you and what's the best way for someone to get started in kind of learning about all the stuff that you're doing within your Skool group?
So DDT Method on Instagram is kind of like the hub of everything, at least as it stands right now. Instagram likes to randomly ban me from DMs and shut me down for stuff every now and then. So if you look for it and it's not there, it might be back. If it's not, it's up right now. But DDT Method on Instagram, the DDT Method podcast on YouTube. That's my podcast. If you like this podcast, I like to carry myself in a very similar way. Just basically bringing in experts in all these different areas and just speaking on everything that we're trying to do in terms of broader performance enhancement in my case. So that would be, yes, DDT Method podcast on YouTube. I'm sorry, I'm terrible at selling myself. And my DDT Method Skool group. So that's skool.com/DDT Method. That's essentially where I put all my deep dive information in there. So my goal for the Skool group, I've said it a few times, I need to make a big intro video on it just to explain it to everybody else. I'm building it up slowly in the background to be what I want to end as the most extensive video content library on all things performance enhancement, from training to nutrition to PEDs to peptides, at the lowest cost of entry, so it's accessible to absolutely everybody. So right now, as it stands, as of date of recording, I have about 70 videos in there, some articles as well, but it's mostly video content because I feel like in an age where articles can easily be done on AI, I want to really deliver my own personal thoughts on these things. So I'll film myself just talking about it, and I'll have notes in some cases because I don't have every fucking enzyme on the planet memorized. And anybody that claims that they do, or they're generally full of shit outside of a few guys. But I'll just take some notes and I'll sit there and I'll just talk to the camera about what I've learned about a style of training, how to program training, how to program nutrition, what peptides to do for whatever purpose, individual peptide and PED profiles, and then there's a Q&A and everything like that. So that's just a $10 a month, just kind of learn everything in there. And I add anywhere between like 2 and 10 videos per week. It depends on the actual workload that I have outside of this and with the other businesses whatnot. But we're building an amazing community there. So that's what I'm focusing on the most, because that's how I can reach the most people. And through there, I'll promote coaching and whatnot at some point. I'm not actively taking on clients right now. But situationally, it's just how can I bring the most information to the most people? So it's DDT Method on all platforms right now, Instagram, YouTube, and then Skool. Just search DDT Method on all of those. That'll expand into TikTok and Threads and everything as I can delegate those things out. But it's really just how many ways can I bring information to as many people as humanly possible.
Just to plug the Skool group, I jumped in there yesterday and I've been just like tearing through videos and it is incredible. It is absolutely amazing. And I don't say that just to like gas you up or anything. Like, I'll be honest, like I think a lot of Skool group content that I've seen from other educators out there sometimes is just like more just the same low level quality stuff that they already had on YouTube. And what I love about your Skool group in particular is that there are some amazing breakdowns. And I think you're like the master at coming up with like analogies that make sense for certain things. Like with the engine and the sparks about oxidative stress, I was like, dang, like that totally makes sense. And so guys, if you want to learn more about this stuff, definitely check out the Skool group. It's a gold mine of knowledge, which I'm a huge fan of. So definitely go check that out. Drew, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Lift heavy, roll hard. Catch you guys later. Peace.